everyone. It is 5:25 a.m. It is Eastern Standard Time, and it is January, February, March, April 26th. And I guess it's the year 2024 from something. Don't know what. I'm not, this isn't, you probably realize by the title, this isn't another shipwreck video, because this popped up in my recommendations, and it's an old sore. It's an old sore that I've been seeing and hearing about 10 years now. Has to be 10 years now. 10 years ago, it was guys like David Boss. For anybody who remembers David Boss, he come on. Now, friend, you listen to me, friend. I'm telling you, friend, this, this Yahweh in the Old Testament, he's got to be the devil. Friend, listen, friend, David Voss. And for the last 10 years, there have been dozens of people pushing this junk. And so just the other day, YouTube pops up in my feed this video by Static in the Attic entitled, "So the True God Wanted the Same Things as the False Gods." And I listened to it. It was tough. It was tough because, first off, it wasn't anything new. I've been hearing this, and I've been answering it for a while. I've got a few older briefs answering these issues. So the thing is, because it seems like a number of people out there are getting plenty of traction off this. So it's got to be answered. And here's the thing. This is a 10-minute video of his. And it's just loaded with problems. So I kind of have to go through some of these points because he's one of the problems. If you come on, you're going to make a video. And you come on and you say, hey, I've noticed this, and this doesn't add up with that, and that doesn't seem to add up with this, and I have my doubts. I don't think this is maybe right. Something. That's one thing. But it's a whole other thing to come on and literally start telling people, unfortunately, in the case of a lot of YouTube and other just online personalities, the people they're talking to are remarkably nescient, and a number of them also remarkably ignorant. So they get away with making certain claims that aren't even true. And here's the thing. So this is about the Bible, and this is this whole idea that the Father that Jesus mentioned, he's not Yahweh. That's a different God. It's an evil figure. And there's a lot of complications to that, is the problem. You're never going to be able to adequately explore an idea like that in such a short video. I guess, as this video is proof of, maybe the best you're going to be able to do is really make a lot of claims that are not, I think, I believe, I've seen this, and this doesn't seem to add up. This does not appear to be right. Oh, you're going to make a lot of blanket claims. This is this, that is that, this ain't that, and so on. And it's remarkably problematic, especially if your audience trusts you. So I'm going to have to go through a couple of points of this. I don't know if I'll get through the whole video or not. So let's get started with Static in the Attics. So the true God wanted the same things as the false gods? Question mark.
Seen my other videos on this subject. You may have a knee-jerk reaction to what I'm about to say. But before you storm off and wish me the best of luck in the fires of Hades, hear me out. If you've read the Old Testament, then you know Yahweh is ruthless, malicious, and a vengeful, wrathful God.
Sure, sometimes. And sometimes he can also be merciful long-suffering, and kind, as his servants can be merciful, patient, and kind. What do you want? What do you want? You want a two-dimensional God? You know, I'm starting to think that this is why all those old pagan cultures, they say, built all those obelisks and worshipped penises. Maybe it's because they didn't want a God who was a pussy. So anyways, let's go on.
And they do things to neighboring tribes that I seriously can't even talk about on here. And
He can't even talk about. What are those things well, we'll see what he talks about, but I tell you, I read the Bible maybe a couple of times, and I'm not sure what these things he can't talk about is exactly.
we've been taught our whole lives that Yahweh is definitely the Father in heaven that Jesus is talking about. But actions speak louder than words. And if you look at the actions of Yahweh and the actions of Jesus, you see polar opposites.
You kind of do. You kind of do. But I think there's very different answers to that than what he and the people pushing this sort of very, very strange theology seem to believe.
Yahweh didn't want to just free the Hebrews, he wanted the Egyptians to suffer in the process.
Aw, he wanted the Egyptians to suffer. Well, first off, they weren't Egyptians. They were Mitzri. They were Mitzri. In fact, look, a good reference book if you want to get educated is Ashraf Ezat's Egypt Knew No, I think it's Egypt Knew No Pharaoh or Moses. It started out Egypt Knew No Pharaoh or Israelites. And he talks about this problem with Egypt and how it doesn't appear in the Old Testament at all. But it appears in the New Testament. That's correct. It appears in the New Testament, Egyptos. It appears in the Greek Septuagint, Egyptos. But it does not appear in the original Hebrew of the Old Testament. What appears there is Mitzrim, and there's nary any positive connection to that word or name and Egypt. But look, that may be aside a little bit. Did this, and I'll use their terminology, okay? Yahweh, which, keep in mind, Yahweh is a Masoretic rendering of those four letters, Y, E, U, and E, but okay, Yahweh. Did he have any reason to be a little bit upset with the Mitzri, or in this case, they say Egyptians? Well, let's play along. If it was in Egypt, would he maybe have had any reason to be a little bit upset with Egypt? Let's start by going and taking a looky at Exodus 1, verse 8. It says, and I'm approaching this mostly all in just the English translation, and this is what we're covering here. I'm reading from the King James, which I'm going to modernize some of the thee, thou, for, thy, But keep in mind that almost anything out there is pretty much standardized to this translation. There isn't huge variations out there that's getting any airtime, okay? So I'm using basically the same script that he and the others are using to try to prove their theories. Exodus 1:8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Well, who was Joseph? Funny story there. It's actually covered in the last 10 chapters of Genesis. So Joseph was a son of Jacob, right? Who's Jacob? Oh yeah, he's got another name. It's Israel. That's right. He was his son, and he was sold to some Midianites, which took him to Egypt. And then they sold him, and he ended up in a what seems to be like a military captain or an official in government, Potiphar's house. Served in Potiphar's house. His wife was kind of a whore, and he wouldn't do the, horizontal mambo with her. So, in her wrath, she told on him and said that he tried to rape her. He got put into prison. While he was in prison, he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's butler and baker, and they got let go. And then sometime later, Pharaoh had terrible dreams that he couldn't understand. So the butler remembered Joseph, and he said, there's this guy in the prison that's pretty good with dreams, and his name is not Sigmund Freud, it's Joseph. So Joseph goes to this Pharaoh. He tells him the dream, and he says, this is what it means. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. I would load up in those 7 years of plenty so that you have more than enough for your years of famine. And Pharaoh listened to him, and he actually appointed him to do all that. And so the way it works out is, well, I'll keep with the Yahweh. So Yahweh gave Joseph this ability to interpret dreams, to have dreams. It was all very prophetic. He gave it to him. So in essence, and not in essence, but I mean in fact, based on the story, it was Yahweh who gave Joseph the ability to do these things, and it was him who made Egypt the most powerful nation anywhere around because of them storing up that 7 years of plenty. So Joseph, the Hebrews, his God, Yahweh, made both Pharaoh and Egypt remarkably powerful. Remarkably powerful. So keep that in mind. At this point in time, when we're picking up in Exodus 1:8, this country that they keep saying is Egypt was super remarkably powerful. Super powerful. Mostly, they had gained a lot of power in a lot of years. They had gained a lot of power, especially in those years of famine, those 7 years. All because of Yahweh. So the Pharaoh at the time welcomes in all of Joseph's family. They moved from Canaan down to an area that they had control over, which the Bible, as our English Bible calls Goshen. And they grew and they multiplied a lot over a century or so. Because remember, we got to pick up Exodus 1. It was probably a century or so in, because we've got to look at the life of Moses before he came back to deliver the people. That's 80 years. So I can't just say 215, which would be their time in Mitzrayim or Egypt. So, they've been there a century or so, and they're really multiplying. They're doing great. And so they say now a new king over Egypt arises, and he didn't know Joseph. Who's Joseph? Well, Joseph who? And he said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. They were really growing. And they had a lot. They had a lot of possessions. They came down there with all of their cattle and their herds, their flirts. And they're really doing good. So he says, come on, let us deal wisely with them. What does that mean, wisely? Cunningly. Lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when a war comes, if there falls out a war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. Now he had no reason other than we are Mitzri and they are Obri or Hebrews. And so, if somebody else attacks us, they could be a fifth column. That's just, a think tank. He's got a think tank going. Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. So they're making their work harder. And we can imagine there's probably a lot of details to that. It's not just as simple as that. There's details. However, it goes on, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. This is happening over a long period of time. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. They were grieved because they didn't appreciate what Yahweh had done through Joseph sometime before. And it goes on, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick and all manner of service in the field, all their service wherein they made them serve with rigor. Oh, I don't understand. Why would Yahweh want to hurt the Egyptians? And the king of Egypt spake. It wasn't just the king of Egypt, by the way. Lots of people are in on it. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one, Shiphrah, and the name of the other, Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but a daughter you shall let live. Why on earth would Yahweh want to hurt the Egyptians? They only want to kill all their boys. I don't understand. What an evil, vengeful, wrathful God. Seems like a reasonable plan to me. I don't know what he's so upset about. He just makes this country and nation the most powerful one around. And then when they forget about that, and they start putting all of these people, which, you know what, if he didn't know Joseph, it's not like he didn't know of Joseph. It's not like he didn't know what happened. Hey, where did all these Hebrews come from? It's like I woke up one day and we're just surrounded by Hebrews. He knew where they came from. He knew the history. He knew what happened. Man, he didn't give a shit. He didn't care. And so not only are they oppressing them very rigorously, and remember when he says, let's deal wisely, cunningly. You know, the way that the governments today deal cunningly with the slave class people. They invent all kinds of interesting systems and language and contracts to keep you working your slave job for next to nothing, or less than nothing. Kind of like that. Hey, he tells the midwives, hey, listen, when a woman gives birth and it's a boy, man, you need to kill him. You need to kill him. What I want you two to do is go and open up some Planned Parenthood offices all around where the Hebrews live, and make it out like it's a good thing. We're here to help. We're the government, and we're here to help. And if they have a boy, maybe just have a little accident. Whoopsie. And if it's a girl, that's all right. Should tell you a lot about the genetics that fathers pass on to boys. Well, plus, you know, men tend to represent far more of a threat than women to governments, ruling powers, etc. Girl bosses are only in movies. So, I would say just by this, we might have a little bit of a clue as to why maybe this Yahweh would want to effect some sort of retribution, hard judgment on not only Pharaoh, but Egypt.
This is the all-powerful God of the cosmos. He could have very easily said, hey, I'm going to make it start raining over in the desert over here, and you guys can go over and have a nice, lush paradise all to yourselves.
Well, I guess he could, actually, but he better change the soil, too, because it's not just a lack of rain, okay? And hey, look, you know what? You want to educate yourself a little bit on the Exodus and the problems at the Sinai and the Levant and Egypt and the whole Middle East. You can pick up my book, The Bible versus the Middle East. It's available at Amazon, even though I am not an affiliate. Won't be, not anytime soon. But you can get that. You can find out why that's a ridiculous idea. Period. But here's the thing. Moses, representing the, Hebrews, the Obarim, or the Hebrews, he went to Pharaoh, and he didn't say, hey, look, my God says he don't like the way you're doing stuff here, so we're just going to leave now. All of us, we're going to get our stuff and we're all going to leave. He didn't say that. So if you check your Bible, you'll see that he said, we wish to go 3 days out into the wilderness, 3 days journey into the wilderness, worship our God. and then they was going to come back. He was asking for a vacation. He said, look, these guys, they've been working real hard for a long time, and they got this God. You remember this God? He was the God of that guy Joseph that made you all rich and powerful and stuff. Yeah, him. We want to go 3 days journey out in the wilderness and worship him. That's all they were asking for. They weren't saying, we want to leave forever. I mean, maybe they did, but that's not what they were asking for. 3 days. We just want to go 3 days, a little vacation. And maybe we kind of, earned it. And he wouldn't. Pharaoh wouldn't let him go. So, there is, of course, a backstory here.
But that's not what he did. He even hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he wouldn't free the Hebrews.
So then what? We're supposed to get all bent out of shape because Yahweh says he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart when they ask him to leave temporarily. Even though it wasn't Yahweh who told Pharaoh to forget about Joseph, to not remember the actual history that made him so rich and powerful. He didn't tell Pharaoh to put all the Hebrews to hard service and bondage and make their lives suck. He didn't do that. He didn't say, I'm going to make Pharaoh do that. He didn't say, I'm going to make Pharaoh have this stealthy plan to murder all their male children. He didn't do that either. And in fact, the first time Moses approaches Pharaoh's Exodus chapter 5, Pharaoh literally says, hey, who's this God of yours? I don't know this God. He'd have to. Back then was not like today where they're erasing history left and right. He knows who he is. Yahweh didn't make him do that either. Oh, Yahweh's bad because he hardened his heart. He made him stubborn. So he's bad. But we're obviously forgetting about everything, all the history that led up to this point in time. Well over a century of history in Mitzrayim or Egypt leading up to this. We're going to forget all about that. And we're just going to accuse Yahweh of being bad because he hardened Pharaoh's heart for him. All right.
That way he could show off his power and his might to scare all the other nations around so that they feared the true God of the Hebrews.
Because who'd want the nations to fear the true God and keep his laws and actually be fair and just and right to one another? Who'd want them to be afraid of God? Who wants them to be fair and just and right to one another?
The Egyptians were giving them all of their nice jewelry and clothing and everything, saying, just leave, please.
Oh, those nice Egyptians. They were so nice that none of them participated. None of them benefited from these Hebrew slave class people building up these cities for them under hard bondage. None of them benefited. None of them benefited over the Hebrews having an excess of girls and not boys. Girls who usually would like to get married, have a husband, maybe have a boyfriend, something like that. They never benefited from any of that. Those poor Egyptians. They gave them all their stuff because those poor innocent people had just been brutalized by Yahweh, this evil God. Jeez, this is a horrible story. Poor people.
And then he gave them the neighboring lands that were already inhabited. All they had to do was cut down every life form that lived there. I mean, down to the livestock.
But they didn't. And look what happened. We can see that in Judges. Because they didn't. Then Yahweh said those people, I'm not going to get, you wouldn't get rid of them. I told you to get rid of them. You wouldn't. So now they're going to be nothing but a curse to you and a hassle. By the time Joshua led Israel into Canaan, the Canaanites, all these various tribes, Canaanites and other peoples, they had been there for centuries and centuries and centuries. Centuries and centuries and centuries. And Yahweh said, he said to Abraham, that their iniquity was not yet full. It was coming. A reckoning was coming. Not fast. Oh, that Yahweh, he's so impatient. He only gives people hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to change their ways, and if they don't in his perfect little time frame, he sends people in there to just, stuff I can't talk about here on YouTube. It was centuries. They were there centuries. And by the time Abraham came, if you just extrapolate, the Canaanites had been in Canaan for centuries. We're talking a long time. A long time before he said finally, yep, I've had enough. Now that's a long-suffering God. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They wouldn't change. Is that impatient? Is that impatient? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years? Finally, this is it. You can say whatever you want about the methods or the translations, what they appear to say. But you can't say anything about, this awful God Yahweh. He sent the Hebrews from the horrors of Egypt. Poor Egyptians, poor Pharaoh. He sent them from the horrors of Egypt over to Canaan to do even worse. To do even worse. Not accounting for the fact that he had told them their iniquity isn't full yet. That was a couple centuries ago. He gave them a couple more centuries to sort it out. Couple more centuries to sort it out. And we know, for instance, from the account of Balaam in Numbers 24, that he had prophets outside of Israel. He had prophets outside of Israel. And in fact, we know from all of the prophets in the Old Testament that he prophesied to all the nations around, trying to set them on the right course if you don't change. What about Jonah? Anybody ever heard of the prophet Jonah? A little story about a guy named Jonah. Where'd he go? Did he go to the people of Israel? No. He went to Nineveh. He went to Israel's archenemy, the Assyrians, prophesying to them, repent, so you're not destroyed. Yahweh was more merciful than Jonah, because Jonah was like, fuck them, I don't want to go. I don't like them. They're Syrians. They're Assyrians. I don't want to go prophesy to the Assyrians and have them repent and you not destroy them. I don't want to see you not destroy them. And even after, at the end of the story, when Yahweh doesn't destroy him, Jonah pouts. He pouts. No, this God Yahweh, he's just vengeful. He's just mad. He's mad at the world. He's mad at the world he made. That's all. That's his problem. He's mad at the world he made. Maybe he should think about himself. Maybe he should think about his own actions. Maybe he should think about his part in all this. I guess that's kind of the silly mindset that we have to have if we want to adopt such a unidimensional point of view, because that's what it is. It's out of context. The point of view is very undeveloped, and it's very immature. You can say whatever you want to, your opinion about, I still don't like him. I don't care. I still don't like him. I think he needs to be good to, well, me especially. He needs to be good to me especially, but I think he needs to be good to everybody too, and we need to all live in harmony and hold hands and stuff. And it's completely not considering just how remarkably horrible man tends to be towards man. You're not looking at the world around you. You're not paying any attention to the way things work. You're not paying any attention to the way that man treats man. If you think that he's so horrible, Yahweh's so horrible. He told them to go in and wipe out those people. And you're not paying attention. And that point of view, again, is very one-dimensional. It's childish.
Meanwhile, Jesus healed the sick, cast out demons, fed people, cured the blind. He did all good things.
Jesus did all good things. Oh, that Jesus. He was so good, and that Yahweh was so bad. Even though, now that I think about it, Yahweh himself or through his prophets actually healed quite a few people. We get stories of him healing a good number of people. Isn't that something? Let's see, he healed Sarah's womb. She was old, couldn't have a baby, made her have a baby. That's something. I think a lot of women out there that couldn't have a baby would like to have a baby. They would say, that's something. That's really something good. What a nice thing. He healed Abimelech in his house after Abimelech was going to take Isaac's wife, which he shouldn't have. And he struck him with the plague. He healed them. And no, you can't say, well, he was the one who did it. Yeah, he does everything. There's multiple verses in the Bible that says he brings sickness and he heals. He brings evil and good. What do you want him to be? Do you want to believe in some kind of duality? Well, the devil is bad, and Yahweh is good, and they're like two halves of a coin. And if it's sickness and bad, it's the devil, and if it's good, it's Jesus, or whoever you want to say. Yahweh healed Naaman. He wasn't an Israelite. He was a leper. He healed him. Healed King Hezekiah. Yahweh's prophet Elisha. These are prophets of, and remember, I'm using their terminology, Yahweh. These are prophets of so-called Yahweh. He healed a little boy, brought a little boy back to life. Elisha. So he healed a lot of people. Healed a lot of people, healed lands, healed governments. I don't know, he saved the entire city of Nineveh from destruction. Does that kind of thing a lot. Kind of overshadows Jesus' good deeds there a little bit. But let's go on.
Spoke of the love of the Father in heaven. And he never said Yahweh who art in heaven. He was using the Greek word kurios, which basically means master, but he knew.
Well, let's explore that, because that's really at the heart of this, at best, misunderstanding, and at worst, deception. So take a look. I don't even have to get out of Exodus. We can stay right where we're at in Exodus to prove that this is utterly wrong. He said when he referred to the Father, he's talking about Jesus, when he referred to the Father, he didn't say Yahweh. No. He used the Greek word kurios, which just means master. Oh, okay, well, let's check and see if that's accurate. Since everybody wants to tell us, well, in New Testament times, they all referred to the Greek translation, what we call the Septuagint. So if we just go to English, we'll just start in Exodus 5:1 in English. It says in Exodus 5:1, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel." The Lord God of Israel. Now, if we look at that in Hebrew, we can see that it's Yahweh, Lord, Yahweh, Alei, God, Israel. There it is in Hebrew. But if we check it in the Greek Old Testament, which is the Septuagint, what do they call him? Well, in God, in place of God, we have theos, right? Well, what do we have in place of Yahweh? Kurios. In place of Yahweh, kurios. I thought he said when he meant the Father, he was talking about not Yahweh, but kurios. Well, that's funny, because every time you'll see what they call the Tetragrammaton, which they transliterate to Yahweh, you know what you're going to see? You're going to see the Greek word kurios. Kurios. That's exactly what you're going to see. And for anybody, and look, now I'm not supporting the theory that Jesus is God, part of a Trinity or anything like that. I'm trying to tell you what the text says and how static is either wrong or being deceptive. So first off, if he uses kurios, Yahweh, every time you see Yahweh in the Septuagint, well, you're not going to see Yahweh. What you're going to see is, instead of Yahweh, you're going to see kurios. That's what you're going to see. So we're off to a real bad start, but there's more to it than that. Because this whole ideology rests on this Yahweh God being different than this Jesus God. or Jesus person, whatever. And when he refers to the Father, he's not talking about this mean, wrathful, bad, evil, hot-tempered Yahweh of the Old Testament. So what we need to do is see if that's true at all. So I'll go you one further for starters. We'll take the first book of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew. And by the time we get to Matthew 4, Jesus is out in the wilderness, right? And it says he's being tempted by the devil. So what does he do to combat this temptation by the devil? Well, he quotes Old Testament passages, doesn't he? Matthew 4:4, he quotes, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." And of course, in here, the Greek, they use theos. But if we refer to the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 8:3, that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. He didn't say God. The Lord doth man live. The Lord? Well, what's the Lord? Well, it's Strong's H3068, which you can see on the screen here. H3068 is Yahweh, what they call Yahweh, or Jehovah, or Yahuwah, whatever they want to say. That's Yahweh. Oh, by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh, that evil, vengeful, wrathful God that's not Jesus' Father, they got nothing to do with one another. Nothing to do with one another. Oh my gosh. There we go. How about the next time he quotes the Old Testament in the wilderness temptation account? Matthew 4:7, it's written again, you shall not tempt the Lord thy God. What words are he using? Lord, Kyrios, God, Theos. If we refer back to Deuteronomy 6:16, you shall not tempt the what? Yahweh, your God. You shall not tempt Yahweh. So it seems like, I think, maybe, we could say that Jesus is beholden to this Yahweh, just from those two verses. And how about the very last verse he uses in the temptation? When he says, for it is written, you shall worship, oh, there's the Lord, Kyrios, thy Theos, the Lord thy God. We can refer back to Deuteronomy 6:14. You've got the Lord. There you go. Thou shalt fear the Lord. What's the Lord? Yahweh. Yahweh, thy God, and serve him, and shall swear by his name. There you go. There's the repeat of the verse that Jesus used. He said, you shall what? You shall worship who? Yahweh. Kind of weird. Kind of weird if this Father that Jesus is referring to wasn't Yahweh. Somebody's not doing their homework. Somebody needs to go back to the drawing board. So let's just see if this Father that Jesus is referring to might be the same person as Yahweh of the Old Testament. First off, now, Static and a lot of others like to say, well, of course, the problem with the Hebrews, or whoever, whatever they want to call them, the Hebrews, the Jews, whatever, is that they were worshiping this horrible death blood god. And Jesus, who he's referring to when he says the Father, that's not the same God. That's not Yahweh. No, it's not Yahweh. Well, the thing is, we can see from the preceding, I'm in Matthew 11:25 right now, we can see from 3, 4, 5 chapters before this, Jesus, when he's speaking to the people, he says, your Father, your Father, your Father, your Father. And then he picks up again with my Father, my same Father. Look at the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, your Father, my Father. But who's this Father? Is it or is it not Yahweh? Well, it's interesting because by the time we get to Matthew 11:25, it says, in that time Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord. Hey, what's that word that he's using for Lord? Oh, curious. Every time we see curious in the Septuagint, what is it? Oh yeah, it's Yahweh. He says, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. Now that sounds familiar. heaven and earth, the possessor of heaven and earth. Now, if we go to TSK cross references and start in Genesis 14:22, it says, Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord. What's that? That's H3068, so-called Yahweh, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Ain't that something? Deuteronomy 10:14 and 15. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is whose? Yahweh's, thy God, and the earth with all that is therein. Interesting. 2 Kings 19:15, Hezekiah prayed before who? Yahweh, and said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, which dwelleth between the cherubims, thou art the God, thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made the heaven and the earth. He said that to Yahweh. Isaiah 66:1. Thus said Yahweh, the heaven is my throne, and the earth my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me, and where the place of my rest? Wow. And then Daniel 4:35. And all the inhabitants of the earth reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can say, stay his hand, or say unto him, what thou doest. And that's only a few Old Testament references to Yahweh being the God or the Lord of heaven and earth, just like Jesus said, O Father, Kyrios, of heaven and earth. Ain't that something? So it would appear that when Jesus is referring to the Father, he's talking about Kyrios, which, as we can see from the Septuagint, is the word which replaces Yahweh throughout the Greek Septuagint. And I would say if we checked 100 more references, we would just see over and over and over and over and over and over again that whenever Jesus says Father and Lord, he's talking about that Yahweh from the Old Testament. I mean, just honest to goodness, I am filled with chagrin that anyone keeps trying this. And you know what? I gotta blame the audience. That you're not catching these people up and telling them that's wrong. That's clearly provably wrong. Like, it's not even that hard. It's not even that hard. I mean, if it was tough and I had to do serious studies and put all my work together and compile it and edit it into a real convincing film, that might be one thing. It's not even hard. It's not even difficult. That's how nutty this theory is. And I'm not even commenting on what my opinions are of the New Testament or the Old Testament in regards to this theory. What I'm telling you is when the Jesus of the New Testament refers to Father, when he refers to God, well, half the time it's a coin toss, because oftentimes in the New Testament they use theos, and you can refer that to the Old Testament and see, oh, that's Yahweh. They're making Yahweh into theos. So sometimes they make it into theos, sometimes they make it into Kyrios. But the thing is, no matter what, when Jesus says Father, he's absolutely referring to Yahweh. So you don't have a leg to stand on. So let's just see what kind of utter shenanigans he gets up to in this video.
He knew the name Yahweh and never used it in that sense, other than to say that you are of your father the devil, the father of all lies. So if you're still here, then congratulations. Think about who brought you this whole concept. It's the Church of Rome.
That's, again, clearly, provably incorrect. Now he's quoting from the Gospel of John. It is only the Gospel of John, the very, very different Gospel of John to the Synoptic Gospels, in which Jesus tells the Jews, it's like John 8, you're your father the devil. So whoever he's referring to, he is not referring to Yahweh. Not if we want to take the overwhelming amount of evidence from all the other Gospels. Let's just take a minority gospel like the Gospel of John to prove our little pet theories.
Who eliminated all competition with extreme prejudice. And for the predator class priests, they love the Old Testament Yahweh because it justifies them in waging, quote, holy wars.
The predator class priests love the New Testament. They use the New Testament. Onward, Christian soldier. They love the New Testament. They use totally the New Testament. And by the look, now that I'm talking about the New Testament, let's go back and talk about this kinder, gentler Jesus. He talked about. He said this Jesus, he healed the sick and the blind, and he did all kinds of good stuff. And he was nothing like that mean Yahweh. Sure thing. But what does it say in Matthew 10:34? Jesus speaking, red letters. Think not that I am come to send peace on the earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. Oh, what do you do with a sword? You can extrapolate. For I'm come to set a man at variance against his father, and daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's foe shall be that of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Oh, he's jealous. He's a jealous, wrathful Jesus. And he that loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He wants all the attention. Jesus the celebrity. He that taketh not his cross, so he who's not into self-flagellation, oh, like the Catholic priest class, he's not worthy. He that doesn't take up his cross, he who's not a masochist, is not worthy of me. That's what he says. He says, if you find your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, if you become a martyr, if you let people kick you around, then you're worthy of me. That's what Jesus says. It's not what Yahweh says. That's what Jesus says. How about when we cross-reference that with Luke? I'm come to send fire on the earth. Wait a minute. I thought Static said it was just that mean old Yahweh that sent down fire on the earth. Jesus said, I'm come to send fire on the earth. That's Jesus talking. And while we're in Luke, how about Luke 19:27? Jesus speaking still, but those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, that would not have me reign over them, bring them here and slay them before me. That's not Yahweh. That's Jesus. So this crazy uber violent priest class he's talking about, they love them some Jesus. Don't be fooled.
And they love to make people so fanatical that they'll do unspeakable things to people in the name of God.
Jesus.
So if Jesus is the Father, one and the same in spirit, and the Father is Yahweh, and essentially what you're saying is Jesus issued some rather dark orders in the Old Testament. In this example where Yahweh rejects Saul as king, it's because he disobeyed orders and didn't eliminate everything and allowed some of the livestock to live.
So without necessarily reading the whole situation, 1 Samuel 15. This is 1 Samuel 15. And this is already after Saul, the first king appointed over Israel, had proven himself to be problematic. He didn't listen to orders too good. He was a bit of an issue. Okay? Now, he was appointed as king. We can basically extrapolate from the text that he was appointed as king as an object lesson. It was Israel who said, we wanted a king. We want a king. They had lived with judges, which was the way that Yahweh wanted it. But Israel said, no, we want a king. The king is better. He got a crown and he's better. I said, okay, I'll give you a king. I'll give you a king that's good looking, tall, regal. Saul. I'll give you Saul. There you go. Here's a good object lesson for y'all in how your king's going to act. And then outside of David, and trust me, David had his own issues, and the Bible accurately recounts some low-life shit that David does. In particular, regarding Uriah the Hittite. Saul was an object lesson. Here you go. Here's your king. Now, Saul had a problem with following directions, taking orders. Do this. Well, I know you said do this, but I thought that maybe this would be better. It was kind of Saul. So by this point, he was ordered to go and what? To go and exact justice on Amalek. Why would he do that? Is it because Yahweh is wrathful and angry and mean? Maybe. It's because in Exodus, when Israel had come to a place called Rephidim, and the transliteration, Rephidim, which was pretty much just before Sinai, we'll say the mount. They were attacked unprovoked. They were attacked by Amalek from the rear. So women, children, whatever else, from the rear, they were attacked unprovoked by Amalek. And after they won that battle, which they had to scramble to, Yahweh told Moses and Aaron to be very, very sure to remember this great offense of Amalek, because he was going to blot out Amalek. And whatever else your opinion is about that, it wasn't because he just took a notion like, I don't like them, I don't like their stupid face. There's reasons. If we contextualize this stuff instead of just showing random verses and saying, see, look there, he rejected Saul because Saul didn't kill everything. He's mean. He's angry. If we put it in context, we can understand that there was a reason that he told Saul to go attack Amalek. And no, he did not want him to save a single thing. He rejected him because, again, Saul had a better idea. I know what he said, and I know that he's God of Israel, but I just had this really good idea. Don't you want to hear my really good idea? That's why he rejected him, because Saul had better ideas. I thought we'd just keep the sheep. Sheep seem like they're in good shape. I thought we'd keep the king alive because that's polite. Well, just let the king be alive. He told him to go and destroy everything. Everything. And people make their judgments. It's real funny, too, because nobody wants to consider, well, how much about back then might be kind of similar to today. Maybe one of the reasons why he would tell whoever it was, whether we're talking about Israel coming into Canaan with Joshua, whether we're talking about Saul going and destroying Amalek, which, by the way, he didn't destroy everything, because when he went down to besiege Amalek, he saw that there were Kenites living among them, and he told the Kenites, you better get out of here. He didn't kill everything and everybody, like it was not a blanket slaughter. He was there to exact justice on Amalek. And you can make any kind of judgment you want. You can say, well, Israel, if there even was an Israel, they weren't worshiping the real God, and he's just a crazy figment of the imagination. You can say that if you want. I'm telling you, just based on the text, that there's reasons. There's reasons. And by the way, if he created everything and gives everyone life and gives everybody everything they have, food, clothing, shelter, things like that, then here's the deal. And this is kind of the hard truth, is that it's his prerogative to decide who lives and who dies. Now, beyond that, you can argue, you could argue and reject that they had any right to do what they did. They weren't hearing from the real God. If you want, you can. That's completely acceptable. And think it through. Make a good argument. Fine. But here's what it is in context, not out of context, in context. And as I said, we don't tend to oftentimes think and equate what they might be doing. Like, for instance, when he even said to them, you got to kill all the livestock. Why the livestock? Who knows? Maybe they were jamming the livestock full of hormones to make them bigger, and vaccines for various reasons. And they were selling all that to various other people, and it made them sick. And they weren't having a very good quality of life because they were raising and selling tainted livestock. But we don't ever want to think about that possibility. Well, no, because back then they all ran around wearing togas, and they never would have been able to think of stuff like using needles and serums and vaccines and stuff. Maybe they tainted their livestock and sold and traded it with neighboring nations to weaken those nations deliberately. Deliberately. That's a good way to weaken people, keep them sick all the time. So you don't know. But that's the problem. So many people who want to talk about that Yahweh, he's just so angry and mad and vengeful and horrible. They don't think about how horrible people are. They don't think about how horrible man is to man. They obviously don't remember. They don't consider how utterly horrible this world is and can be to them. How oftentimes just other men, even their neighbors, not just the people in power, their neighbors can be to them. We just all of a sudden forget. And we want to say, he's bad. He's a bad God. He's mean. And there's just no objective to that at all.
Right. At the beginning of the Bible, when Moses was leading everyone out of Egypt, Moses was angry with the officers. Well, why was he angry with them? Well, because they couldn't bring themselves to do it. And he says, what, you've allowed the women to live? And finally, Moses concedes a little bit and says, well, okay, all of the women that haven't slept with a man yet, the virgins, you can keep them as prizes, but everybody else has got to go.
It's interesting. I didn't see him say in the text, you can keep them as prizes. He did say, absolutely, you got to kill all those women who've been with a man. That's true. You keep the women that haven't been with a man as prizes? Yeah, I don't know, because that's not in the text. It's not in the text.
Wasn't it being ruthless enough that he wasn't allowed in the promised land?
So, Static just says here, Moses wasn't being ruthless enough. And again, he takes the whole thing out of context. He says he wasn't being ruthless enough, and that's why he wasn't allowed into the promised land. Yet, funnily enough, we see in Deuteronomy 32:51, this is repeated also earlier in Deuteronomy 32:51 and 52. Because you trespassed against me, this is Yahweh speaking, amongst the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh. Kadesh. Not the incident he's talking about with the Midianites. That's what he's quoting. It's the incidents with the Midianites. And of course, as with everything else, there's a context there that we need to understand. He says, because you transgressed me among the children of Israel, the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel, yet thou shalt see the land before you, but you shall not go there. It had nothing to do with Moses being a little too soft. He was too soft. He wasn't a hard ass. And he told them they could keep the virgins as prizes, so he couldn't go in the promised land. It's like, provably, you can find the answer to that at like Got Questions. Jeez Louise.
Let's say directly to Yahweh is specifically mentioned in the Old Testament. Well, after the battle, they were dividing everything up, and there were 300,000 sheep, of which the tribute for the Lord was 675, cattle Lord's tribute was 72, the donkeys 61, and then of the 16,000 people, the tribute to the Lord was 32. And it just said right before that that the only people that they allowed to live were the women who hadn't slept with a man, the virgins. So part of the Lord's share of the plunder was 32 virgins. And we're going to get into exactly how tribute for the Lord is supposed to be performed. It's a ritual burning performed by the Levites who were responsible for the care of the tabernacle. And it says specifically right here, Moses selected 1 out of every 50 people. The only people that were alive were the virgins. Let me ask you something. How was tribute paid to all of the old false gods that all of the nations had? Well, it was by making burnt offerings on altar. So people have been making these offerings for millennia, and then the true God of the universe comes along and he says, well, yeah, I created everything, but the smell of a burning goat does smell really good to me, so I think you guys should just go ahead and keep making the offerings that you make to the false gods to me. Does that make any sense? As I've pointed out before. And one of
So here's where we get into this really sticky part of not just the people that espouse this sort of theology way of thinking. A lot of other people. I mean, this is something that, like your Matt Dillahunties, we'll talk about at length for good reason, right? This idea, this God, this God, he seems to delight in killing and burning things. Killing and burning things. Of course, your Christian will say, well, that was all a shadow and a forepicture of the Messiah to come. Well, of course, that doesn't quite work because, according to the Gospels, Jesus wasn't burned. He wasn't burned, just crucified. And the funny thing is, none of those animals, according to the translations in the Old Testament, were crucified. And crucified. You take that lamb and pound some nails through its little paws. Hang it up there for a day or two. See how it does. So that's a stretch. Like he said, a burnt offering. He wants it burned just like all of the other false gods. The sadistic false gods, they want you to take animals and maybe peoples. They want you to kill them and burn them. Do some crazy stuff. So herein lies the problem. And this is a lot of what I do with the Obry Project. We look into terminology. How much can we trust the terminology? As far as how much can we trust terminology that has been foreone? Admittedly, now they won't say, well, of course, we took words that meant this thing and completely changed them to that thing so that we could accomplish a certain end goal. They won't say that. They will absolutely tell you that they have standardized, altered terminology. And then it does get altered again to a degree when it goes from the Masoretic. Because the graphemes that are used in Masoretic Hebrew, and you won't be able to see it probably if I bring up the IHOT. Let me see. Yeah, they got the graphemes just on the so-called shin. But you'll typically, if you look at a Hebrew manuscript, you're going to see these graphemes all over every word, the dots and dashes and such. Those dots and dashes actually determine what a word is, how it's used, parts of speech, things like that. Now you can look at two different words and you can say, that's the same word. Hey, that word is the same word. But because of not only graphemes, but Masoretic notes, where they say, oh, I know that word is in there, but I don't want you to think about that word, so don't think about that word. And then sometimes they'll say, I know this word isn't in there, but definitely I want you to think about this word. And we can see that in English too, when we look just through English, like Numbers 31:36. You've got a couple of, you see those gray italicized words. They aren't original. And sometimes they're not even honest enough to give us the gray italicized words. Sometimes they'll just turn a single word into 2, maybe 3, even 4 words. And you're going to trust that. See, the problem with something like, okay, if he says, well, this Yahweh, he wants a burnt offering. He wants us to kill stuff and burn it. The root to that, what we're going to mostly see, is burnt offering. That's Strong's H5930. It's listed in Strong's as ole. Ole. It's not bullfighting. Ole. But it is where the Latin transliteration that we have to this day, Holocaust, that's where it comes from. Okay? That word. It occurs 290 times in the text. This word, ole. Now, this is the root ol. That's the root, the word ol. And it just has this E on the end. It's a feminine E on the end there, ole. You can see that with hundreds of words. The root and then an E on the end. It's a little bit more general than the word itself. Maybe a little less specific. We can see it in like eol. This is, all right, same root, eol, wild goats. Eole, a row. Ma'ol, commit or trespass. Ma'ol, trespass or transgression. Ma'ol, again, upward, above, or before. I didn't know sin and upward were the same thing. We can see it again and translated one time. Same word as all the rest. One time as lifting up. And then going up or ascent. Steps, stairs, degrees. Na'ol is even closely related. Na'ol, locked or shod. Shoes. Shoes. And then we get into this whole, we got a very large list of just ol words, mostly just ol. Sometimes with very little variation. So it could be young or milch, like a young cow or sheep or whatever that's still suckling. See it again as an infant or a suckling. And again as unjust or unrighteous. These kids, they're unjust and unrighteous. That's why we call them the same thing. We see it 53 times as iniquity. Again, damn kids. We see it 4 times just ol, raised, or used in most high, aloliun. That's kind of how it is. We see it again, ol, against, over, on, and sometimes off. That's right, the same word. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. You gotta just trust the Masoretes, the mystery Jews of the Middle Ages that apparently existed. Well, we have it another 40 times as a yoke, not the kind in an egg, the burden kind. Then we see it 889 times as went up or go up. We're talking about a verb, ascend. A verb, ascend. 18 times as leaf or branch. And then we get to our 290 times as burnt offering. Mostly, we can see mostly across the board, and this is the way these are translated. I'm telling you, the majority of times they're translated. If I included every way that every one of these words were translated, I wouldn't have a table big enough to fit it. So this is mostly how these words are translated. So we can see that for the most part, when we have this ol root, it's referring to something ascending. So how do you cross the bridge on the one bank where ol is ascending? How do you cross the bridge to the other bank where it's set on fire and it's ascending in smoke? Because I guarantee you all these other times when they're using a verb saying this person went up a hill, they weren't going up the hill as smoke because they were on fire. So that's a big bridge to cross. Maybe it's a thought. It's just a thought. Maybe when we see ol used in the sense of anything, Grain, burn the grain. When we see it as general things, objects, items, burn them all. Or when we see it as animals, burn, 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 burn. Maybe it doesn't mean burn at all. Because the people in the law, they're commanded to bring the various things that they have to bring to Levites. Bring it to the priests, who would be the head of the Levites. Why? Because they were a secret priest class that they held sway over the people. Now, I don't know if it ever became that, and probably did. It seemed like all of Israel corrupted their ways. I don't see why the priests or Levites would be any different than the rest of the nation. Maybe it was part of government taxation for the sake of government running. Now, there's a difference between reasonable taxation so that a nation and government can run, and certain people that have been assigned to do certain jobs, like scribal jobs and other things, can have stuff, can have food in their belly, a roof over their head, a little warmth. But it says, what if it says offer up? How else do you offer up? Perhaps what we're seeing is the difference between giving in a very horizontal way, a lateral way, to giving in a very vertical way, which would be to give to the Levites, the priests, who also would distribute excess to those who needed it. I don't think those who need those things are going to appreciate if it's all burned, we brought you a bucket of ashes. I know you were hungry. Here they are. Enjoy. A little salt, maybe. So do you see the problem? Just in the word, just in the terminology. Just in the terminology. Well, what about all the times when they use the word for fire? Well, funny thing is, the word for fire is also used for gift. Like when Yahweh brought Eve to Adam. Asha, gift. Asha, woman. Asha, fire, burn, burn, fire, water, burn. So there's a problem. You do have a word that appears to be better in context than all of these, and it's B-O-R. Bor. Sometimes it appears in the text as with an N at the end, an N suffix, borin. Now, I'm not so great with English and dictionaries, but borin sounds so much like a word I'm kind of familiar with. Borin. Borin. Now that sounds a lot more like something as burning. Burning. But when we get into words that have so many other different variations that they occur as same word, you have to call into question this whole practice. Now, here's a theory for you. It's just a theory. Maybe whoever has been in charge of changing the text, and you can call them the Masoretes if you want in the first place, and then those who translated this into English and hold sway over the text and have for a while now. Maybe what they thought would be a good idea is to make this Yahweh out to be just as crude, if not more crude, than all of the silly-ass legends of Greek gods and this pagan god and that pagan god and so on and so forth, by changing terminology so that he would seem like a brutal sadist. Is that a possibility? You think maybe? I mean, I would have to say if our language hadn't changed at all in many, many, many centuries, and that's the way it has existed, has always said that. What are you talking about? It's always said he wants to burn stuff. He likes to burn. He's a little bit, look, he may be the god of the universe, but he's got a little problem with pyromania. It's just the thing. He's working on it. He's working on it. If it always said the same thing in the same language and there was no change in our language for a long time, I might be more apt to say, well, I guess he just, he likes to burn stuff, I guess. The problem is that that's not the way it is. We can look back and see many changes, a lot of excuses for those changes too, by the way. We can see many changes to all the languages of the world in a relatively short time now. A. B. If the text really said that graphically, and you were going to change it like the Masoretes did, because people want to make up all kinds of things about these evil people, these Israelites, they worship this crazy false god, they made him up to justify their actions. Well, then you wouldn't want to change it in the way that it's been changed. You wouldn't want to make him out all nice and stuff. This god, he's the best. He's absolutely the best. He made a lollipop tree grow in my front yard. That's how you change it. And you wouldn't keep in all the bad stuff about you and your people, because the Old Testament is loaded with criticisms of Israel. It's loaded with them. Loaded, loaded, loaded. They suck. For real. I mean, if you want to say, well, the changes were to make it all sound maybe better than it was. Well, then you'd want it to sound better. You'd want yourself to sound better. But nobody in here sounds too good. They all sound pretty lousy. So I guess who's ever changing it to try to make it sound better did a really bad job. They're kind of stupid. They were smart enough and genius enough to come up with this whole system of the Masorah, all the notes that have an effect on the way that we interpret the text, including all the graphemes, which have a direct effect on terminology. Chopping up verses, putting ideas together. They were smart enough to do that, but they were so stupid that they left all the bad stuff about themselves in there. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense to me. Then it all gets changed a little bit more when it goes into English, for the worst. For the worst. So there's a serious problem. There's a serious problem with the things that maybe some people who believe in the Bible. I'm not saying I don't when I make that statement. What I'm saying is there's a problem not only in the stories that some people who believe the Bible would cherish about it. The talking serpent, the worldwide flood, and other things. There's problems with those because of language terminology. The changing, ever changing grammar and syntax and other things. And there's also a very big problem with the things that are not pleasant about the text as well. Like making Yahweh into a crazed sadist. That's right. He created everything. He owns everything. He has power over everything. But what he wants you to do, if you want to serve him, he wants you to take this knife and box of matches and go do his will. That's what he wants. He came up with everything. Those complex systems of cells that make a tree strong and feeds the whole tree and makes it grow year after year. He actually came up with that. But what he wants you to do is take this knife and box of matches and go do his will. Go kill stuff and burn it. Does no one see how little sense that makes? Because obviously, Static doesn't see what little sense that makes. Now, if you want to come on and you want to say that doesn't make sense. I mean, look at this. I see this saying this and that saying that, and it don't make sense. I can accept that. I would never make this video. I'd be like, good, I can spend my mornings doing something more productive. Then say it doesn't make sense, because it doesn't make sense, by the way. It don't make no sense. But don't come on here and say like, yeah, this is this and this is that. Because obviously either you don't know the context. So if we're just talking about, we're going to accept the English as it stands, because I think the Masoretes were probably pretty good folks. So if you want to accept the English as it stands, don't present all of these things out of context, one. Secondly, become more familiar with translations like the Septuagint and the fact that they always present the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah, as curious. And become familiar with the fact that no matter in the New Testament, if somebody is quoting an Old Testament passage, if they're quoting a passage that has both God, Elohim, and Yahweh, oftentimes they're both going to be translated as theos, and once in a while as curious. Become familiar with that. Give us something in context. Don't just take it out of context. Do you believe what they did? They got to keep those virgin girls as a prize. Do you know the story? Do you know the whole story of what happened? And how Moab plotted with Midian to derail Israel, to corrupt Israel. Do you know the story that they were practicing warfare by deception? The same kind, I say, has been practiced against the entire world for at least a century or so now. That's what they did. So they got their just desserts. They got a reward. Israel went to war with them because they did something first. Israel didn't do something. They did something first. They wanted to wage war against them by deception. Not like men. Not like men. Going out there, hey, we're a bunch of men, and we see you're a bunch of men, and we kind of don't like you guys coming around here, so we're going to have us a battle. Now, you may say, that's just stupid. That's toxically masculine. I mean, maybe. I don't know, maybe. But like men. You go out there like men. We're going to have us a good old-fashioned fight because we're men. No. They did all of this through deception. First, they hire this prophet Balaam. They want him to curse Israel. That goes south. Then they start sending in their women. They're like, that's how we're going to get to them. We're going to corrupt them with our women. It was low-down, dirty, shit-eating tactics is what it was. Same thing with like, Egypt. Not Mitzrayim, right? Egypt. Pharaoh. Saying, let's deal cunningly with these people. You get that? You see how low down and dirty and shitty it is to secretly wage war against somebody? That's what they did. So they got rewarded for it. Yahweh told them, go take care of them. Go exact justice on them. And he didn't tell them to take all your swords and matches with you. He said, go exact justice on them. And you can imagine what happened. They did just that. There's always a context. You can judge it any way you want, sitting in your soft-ass house, in your soft-ass chair, with your soft-ass life. Go ahead. You just go ahead and judge that. It's awful. It's horrible. Oh, it's horrible. I read that and I just feel bad. And I don't really care. I don't really care how you feel about it. I'm just telling you what is based on the text. I'm telling you what the text says. That's what I do. I report what the text says. And I try my best to look around the world and see the way reality works and the way people work, the way everything seems to work, and try to harmonize those two together rather than isolate texts and try to prove some kind of kooky point by isolating texts. I think that's the more responsible way to do it. So I've had enough. I really can't get through the rest of the video where he brings his dog in there. Look at my cute dog. Oh, wouldn't it be awful Yahweh would want me to kill and burn my cute little dog. And that's a whole other issue about, at best, we're looking at dedication. Dedication. Hey, you know what? A lot of Christian religions still practice that. Just dedicating a child. We want to dedicate this child. We want this child to live a good and holy life. A life in service to whichever deity that they're thinking of. Dedication. The way Samuel's mother dedicated him. She brought him to the priest. And he didn't kill and burn him. He lived there. He lived there with the priests. Grew up there. She went all the way. She dedicated him. And she was given a lot more children besides. She visited him. She knew him. She dedicated him. She didn't burn him. I'm gonna burn him. Yahweh likes stuff burned. I'm gonna burn him. Feel kind of bad about it. He's my baby. Get your head right. Don't use emotionalism. Look at my cute puppy. Yahweh wants me to burn my puppy. Again, I'm just going to end with, I only in part blame the charlatans that try to pass this horseshit off as something even remotely believable. But I put a lot of blame on the people who actually, if they're actually real people and they're not just bought and paid for. And it's so illuminating. I'm so glad. I'm so glad someone shed light on this subject. Because there's no light to be had in the entirety of that video. None. No light. I blame the people as much as the charlatans pushing bad theology in a bad way. So since that's about all I can take, I'm going to wrap this one. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.